Alrighty, hello, this is lesson 1.7. It's one of my favorites. It deals with Mr. Frederick Douglass, and it's titled, How Did Frederick Douglass Criticize American Democracy? So first off, learning intention is to be able to analyze parts of Frederick Douglass's speech on July 5th, that kind of criticized American democracy. And then your success criteria is you need to be able to interpret that speech, explaining his criticism, and then make connections between his speech and references to equality that you've learned about and read about in other documents that we've studied in the last couple of lessons. So the reason why this is one of my favorite documents of this unit, and really of most of the year, is because it's just the situation around when this speech was given is just, I mean, it's perfect, and I say that sarcastically. So the time period it's July 5th, and Frederick Douglass is in New York, and he's asked to give a speech about the 4th of July, and it's the day after the 4th of July, but he's asked to give a speech about democracy and freedom and all of that. So what's really important, and I'll read the lesson introduction because it really sets the stage rather well. So let's go through that first. Over the past few days, in class, we've learned about many different people's opinions about what type of government would work best in the United States. We have also learned that about how different people define democracy. Think back to the beginning of our country. In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, we just read about him a couple days ago, in the Declaration of Independence, it stated that all men are created equal. All men are created equal. Granted, that is in 1776-ish, and we know that not everyone is treated equal in 1776, but it's written there, and that's going to be almost like the pillar of our new nation and what it will become one day. And we say right in that document, all men are created equal. Thomas Jefferson called for equal and exact justice for all men in his inaugural address that we read about a couple days ago. And I'll say that again, equal and exact justice for all men. And that was in 1801. Again, slavery still existed then. So that said, we know that that everyone wasn't treated equally during much of our country's history. Some people would still argue correctly that there's some inequality in today's world. Slavery existed until 1865. The remnants of slavery and the harm of slavery continued, and maybe even still continues today. Women weren't granted the right to vote until 1920. Even today, there's evidence that there's some significant inequalities that exist. So this whole idea that our primary source documents from like 1776 and 1801 claim that we're all equal might rub some people the wrong way. And Frederick Douglass was one of those people that it did not necessarily jive well with him when he was asked to give a speech about the 4th of July, the day after the 4th of July. So, Frederick Douglass was a famous abolitionist, or somebody that fought against slavery, and he was born in 1818 and died in 1895. During his life, he was a vocal opponent of slavery. On July 5th, 1852, for those of you keeping track of dates, that's about 10 years before Abraham Lincoln becomes president. So, the day after the 4th of July, Douglass made a speech in Rochester, New York. In this speech, he passionately pointed out the unfinished business that our country had regarding the statements made in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. I put that in air quotes because at the time of this writing, people are not treated equally in this country. Just plain, slavery exists for another, 10 or 15 years when this was written. So this is part of his speech, and it's really important to know, and I'm not a very good actor myself, but this speech was made, and he had a lot of passion, and he had a lot of anger when he made this speech. This was not a speech where he sat there and he read da-da-da-da-da by beat. No, none of that. He was very passionate. He was very angry when he gave this speech. Imagine if you were an African American living in this time period, in 1855, slavery still exists, and somebody has the nerve to ask you to give a speech about equality the day after the 4th of July. imagine, and you know people, and your family members perhaps were slaves, and somebody has the nerve to ask you to, give a speech about freedom and equality. That rubbed him the wrong way, to say the least. So I'll try my best to read this with passion and anger, but I'm not a very good actor. So the coming into being of a nation in any circumstances is an interesting event. But besides general considerations, there were certain circumstances which make the advent of this republic an event of special attractiveness. The whole scene, as I look back at it, was simple, dignified, and sublime, meaning it was wonderful. What, to the American slave, is the 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty? Pff, an unholy license. Your national greatness? Swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants? Brass-fronted and impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality? Hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. Happy 4th of July, right? His anger comes through here, and line by line. That middle section, which I'm going to go through, is right here, and he's comparing what is usually celebrated on the 4th of July to what he considers actually what is being celebrated. So to him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty, your yay USA, it's an unholy license that you have no right to do that. Your national greatness, thinking that your nation is better than everyone else? Pfft, swelling vanity, you're full of yourselves. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, how you're so proud to get rid of that king. Pfft, it's more or less you're full of crap, because to a slave, there's a king sitting right in that plantation house that has complete control over your life. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Imagine how a slave would react on a plantation when the plantation owners would celebrate freedom and equality and independence on the 4th of July. If I were a slave, I'd either be laughing, saying you're full of crap, or I'd be really, really angry because they're celebrating independence from their king, 100 years ago, but yet you are still dealing with an owner that is acting like a king to you. So imagine, in New York City, in the middle of the day, Frederick Douglass makes this speech about freedom and equality on the day after the 4th of July, and you can imagine that, this didn't necessarily go over all that well, but to some point, isn't everything he says true? To an American slave, this is probably exactly how they viewed the 4th of July and the fireworks and the celebrations, because to many of them, most of them, they didn't get to celebrate any of that. They had no independence. They had no freedom. They had no equality. Even though our primary documents, our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, all of that, Jefferson's inaugural address says that all men are equal and everyone should be equal. And yet, 80 years later, that equality is not realized by a significant portion of the population, who is asked to sit by while fireworks go off and American flags are waved to the majority who has pride in our country. Now, it's important to say that you should have pride in your country. But at the time, African Americans and slaves were really, you could make the argument they didn't consider this their country, because they were forced here and they, really had no rights in this country. So the next time you have a 4th of July celebration, kind of ask yourself, is there equality and is there freedom? Maybe not just for you, but for everyone else. Are there people in this country that have not gotten that equality and that freedom yet? Right? Alrighty.